Welcome to Ploughman's Backyard. My name is Kendra, and today we're doing a mid-July garden tour. I have been pretty excited about this year's garden for many reasons. So if you're not familiar with our channel, we garden in Canada with short season crops. So we have about 70 days to grow the majority of our crop in which we want to preserve for winter and eat fresh. So pretty much what happens is we start preparing like around February. So it's kind of like a winter, early spring prep on the garden. So things were going really well in the house. Things were growing exceptionally well, but we got a really late start on the garden this year. But not only that, we had tons of rain and are still getting so much rain. I've been out looking at the garden. I usually do like a first week garden tour in July. It is now mid-July, and nothing has really improved much. I have to say, this is probably one of the worst gardens I think that I have seen in a long time, especially being here, because usually in this area, it tends to be a little bit more wet because we're in a bit of a lower area in this location. Our gardens thrive on the fact that there usually is some water, at least under the soil. Now, with all this rain that we've been getting, the water is just pooling in the garden, which is not great. I have to say, this is probably the first year that we've had so much rain like this that I remember that has affected our garden. We were really late planting our tomatoes this year, but that seems to be the one thing that is actually growing. Everything that I planted early, planted basically around like the 10th and stuff of June, are not growing well. The things that I planted later in June, the tomatoes, the cucumbers, are growing pretty good. And believe it or not, I only just planted my potatoes about 3 weeks ago, so they're on a really slow start this year. And the bad thing is that we actually have birds bird bathing in our potato and in our corn garden. That is not a good sign. I went back and I was looking at last year's garden, 2023's July garden tour. Last year, yeah, things were a bit slow because when we start here, we start late. And so most of our crop is really booming in August, but it is even behind last year. Even though like last year with all the smoke and stuff we were dealing with from the forest fires, it put our gardens behind and did affect our gardens. This year, the rain seems to affect it way more than the smoke did. I say just by looking at it, I'm going to take you through and show you, like for one, our raspberries were coming on really good. A few weeks ago, I was kind of cleaning it up and weed eating it around the raspberries because I knew they were coming and I'd have to get in there and pick them. And with all this rain, everything like fell to the ground. They're kind of mushy. I'm not going to get much of a crop out of them. And normally like I can like a ton of raspberry jam from that raspberry patch. I don't even think we got a bowl this year out of that. The asparagus didn't do exceptionally well this year either. We got maybe about 6 harvests off it, which usually we get like an abundance and are sharing with neighbors. I'm not getting any squash. We've got a few zucchinis that I started early, I want to say in March, in the house. They're doing okay, and I usually don't start zucchinis that early. Usually I just plant them outside and they grow, but I knew that this year I probably would need to start some early, and I did. And they're the only ones that took off. And I planted about 8 by seed and nothing is coming up because it's just so wet. And the fact that it's been wet, the ground is kept cool, which then has obviously affected my corn. So we planted brand new seed this year. I was really hoping to get a good crop. I planted at about the right time. And I want to say, I don't know, a couple come up. I'm going to take you down and I'll show you. It's really sad looking. I planted about 12 squash seeds, hoping to get some winter squash. And I think 1 came up. And it's just because it was pooled of water, like it was just sitting with water. The main garden isn't doing too bad, but with all the rain, I find that the slugs are really affecting the garden. Anything that starts, like even the beans, they'll get a little start on them and then they get a little leaf and it's cut right down to the soil again. So I think we are going to get some beans this year. I definitely think we're going to get some tomatoes. They seem to be doing really well. I think that the celery are going to do okay. And the onions are doing fantastic. My potatoes are just having a slow start, but I think they will catch up in time. I was really discouraged when I came out. I've been checking, every few days, and things really just aren't coming along. So I'm probably going to have to go out and purchase a lot of the crops, like even squash, I'm gonna have to go out and purchase probably from a local farmer or somewhere. You know, every year is so different. Like the garden can be so bountiful some years, and then some years like you have nothing. And so there's so many struggles sometimes when you're homesteading. Things just don't always work out. Even like the fact that we start in February preparing, you know, seeds and starting seeds and preparing the garden and, you know, getting the garden prepped and tilled, like so much work goes into the garden. You don't realize that when you have a bad year like this, there's a lot of time and money invested, and it's just disappointing. But unfortunately, there's things that come up that affect it, whether it be weather, pests, and things like that you just can't control. So it's kind of one thing when you're homesteading, you know, you just have to be ready for those disappointing times. But you know, on the other aspect, there's some things that are going to do really well, and then you just hope for a better year next year. So this is kind of my main garden area. We do have some beans, some bush beans growing up here. I did have to like double sow. Not all of them sprouted. I still think we're going to get a decent harvest, at least for our family. They're not doing too bad. We get about like 2 or 3 days of rain, like just, and it's not even like just regular rain. It's like downpouring rain to the point where it looks like it's white outside. So we're getting so much rain when we do get rain that as soon as I'm out and I'm picking through the little weeds that are coming up, like they grow back so fast in 3 or 4 days. It's amazing how fast these things are growing. Like especially with my chard, like the weeds are just taking over. I don't know who else is experiencing a very poor garden this year, but leave a comment below and just let me know how your garden's doing and where you're located. And the beans, they're small, but I know that I'm going to get beans at least this year. I think we're getting into more heat now, which the garden really does need a lot of heat to start producing. This one looks like it's probably going to be doing really well. And believe it or not, there's like a row right along here, and I put zucchinis just along this patch here, and I only have one that's coming up. Really not doing well. Surprisingly, after planting a whole row of zucchinis, I have this one plant coming up. But I did start some zucchinis ahead of time indoors, and I planted them somewhere else. So I'm thankful that at least I didn't plant them all in one area, because this spot's not doing well. And we use a lot of zucchinis in the winter for soups and things. So these are my chard, my rainbow Swiss chard. They got some, I don't know if you can see it or not, but there's some pink and reds growing here. There's a weed I'll take out while I'm here. Another weed. But these I planted, I want to say, I think it was the first week of June. They're just not getting the heat that they need. Usually I have so much chard. I have one that's growing a little bit better here. It's up on a little bit of a higher spot. So I think there's just some spots of the garden that are a bit lower. This one seems to be doing okay, but I really think that it should be a lot bigger. And we've got the next one here beside it. Again, just tiny little things. I want to say like eventually they'll take off, but they're just so far behind. So one thing that I think is actually going to do really well this year is our grapes. So our grapevines, I think that we're kind of right on schedule with them, but I think the rain has really helped them a lot. Plus I pruned them back a lot this year. So I think also that helped, but there seems to be a lot of fruit coming on. And they kind of thrive in the wet environments. Our haskaps did really well, and you know that our cherries did really well this year, and the currants are doing pretty good as well. So even though like my raspberries aren't doing great, the blueberries haven't really picked up yet. And you know, the apples aren't too bad either. I'm just not sure about pests this year. We'll have to see. But so far, like the fruits are doing way better than the vegetables, so it looks really great. I'm excited about that. Got some grapes coming on. They're looking really good. Seem to be doing well. You can see way up there, there's some more grapes as well. I don't know how I'm going to get up there and pick those, but there is a lot coming along. In and amongst here, we've got more grapes. So next on the list is the beets. I've got 2 rows of beets here that seem to be kind of on schedule. They're not too far behind. We planted these the first week of June as well, the same time as the chard. You can see they're doing a lot better than the chard was. I still have a few that are behind here. They don't really take a whole lot of time to grow. Like I said, even though I've got the ground cloth down, there's still weeding to be done in the garden. You don't really get away from it. Anyways, It's looking promising. So normally by now I have like a ton of herbs. As you know, if you've been following us, I grow a lot of basil, parsley, thyme, basically for the winter, so I don't buy a whole lot of herbs. This year I have one thyme patch. Usually I have like 6 patches of thyme, and I have no basil and I have no parsley. I did put them out as started plants and they died. So I don't really have much of a herb garden this year, which is again a little bit sad, but I do have one little patch of thyme. I'll show you how it's doing. So this is our thyme. So sad. I usually have like a whole bunch of thyme growing for the winter. And this is my teeny weeny little parsley. Usually I can get like a first cutting by now. I don't know. I might get one cutting probably for the whole season this year. Let's see. I did plant, well, it might be actually. Let's see. I did plant some oregano. Not doing very well, but it's still here, still alive. So this is my oregano here. I think it'll come back okay. But that's about all that I have. I also planted like a whole bunch of dill and I have nothing to show for it. I could probably go ahead and re-sow, but I don't think I'm going to bother. I'll probably just pick some up at a local market or something. I have some onions that I planted. So these are my green onions. So they're looking pretty good. They're the bunching onions. Again, pull these nasty little weeds. So I had more than this, but 1, 2, 3, and a teeny weeny little one over here. So I've got 4. And then, believe it or not, I did a second row here of chard, and as you can see, not much has come up. I do have some kale that we planted in, I think it was May. We planted the kale. It seems to be doing okay. We have a little bit of kale. We planted our tomatoes. If you haven't seen the last video, I went through and was showing you what I do to plant my tomato plants. They started out to be very small, but are really picked up. I've even got a few tomatoes on the plants itself. Not a whole lot of flowers yet. I'm really impressed with just how well, like look at this. Like these haven't been outside very long and have taken off. Got some flowers coming on some of these. There's a few of them that actually have tomatoes. They actually were planted the last week of June. So they've been outside for maybe 3 weeks. They were very tiny and frail, but really picked up. I'm really happy with how the tomatoes turned out. So if anything at all, I think we'll have an abundance of tomatoes. Very excited. Got some tomatoes coming along, looking good. And we've got some more tomatoes. Lots of different types of tomatoes, so yeah, they're really thriving. And now that the heat has finally arrived, they've really picked up. But they really loved having all that rain, I think, within the first couple weeks of being outside. Here I have planted the celery. It's all the way, actually, yeah, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 celery plants growing here. They seem to be doing really well. They love having, lots of rain, so they seem to really have thrived. And I really think there's going to be another great harvest of celery this year. If you haven't seen last year's harvest video, we had harvested so much celery. So looking forward to that. It's such a nice vegetable to grow. The taste is just amazing, and it seems to grow really well here. So that's something to be said, no matter the condition. Kind of like the onions, they always do really well. So there's always nice to have some things in your garden that that just love your climate and they love your soil type. So this is my very, very, very sad looking potato patch. We've got 3 rows of potatoes in here. I planted these maybe, 2 weeks ago? 3 tops. They are starting to come up all along here, but there's patches you can see here down at the very far end that literally birds just last week were coming out and bathing in my potato garden. That's how bad the rain was. Now potatoes do thrive on like a more wet environment, So this is a great spot here. This is one of the lowest spots of our garden, so I'm not surprised that there was puddles everywhere. It's probably I think it's one of the 2 lowest gardens that we have. But the potatoes always thrive here. We'll see how they turn out, but they are starting to come. Probably by September we'll have a good harvest, but it's just looking, they're definitely way behind what they were last year, so we'll see how they do. Over here, usually this is all covered with cucumbers. We'll see how they do, how they take off. We have some bare spots here where basically the cucumbers ended up not growing when I planted seed, but every cucumber plant that I planted in the house and started are still thriving. Got our first cucumber on this one here. I want to say that it's a market more. You can kind of see it there. Lots of flowers. I think that they're going to do well. So if you want to talk about a very sad garden, it's probably my corn garden and my squash. It was just in a pool of water last week, and we planted new corn seeds, so I was really excited about this. I planted a whole lot of squash thinking I was going to have like abundance of squash this year. I don't even see one squash up. Anyways, we'll be heading to the farmers markets, probably picking up some squash for this winter. I have a couple corn here. It's not going to turn into much. I think I've got like 6 corn in this row, maybe 4 in that row, 4 in this row. Yeah, it's really, really bad. And like I said, I planted tons of squash here as well. So I usually get a whole lot of corn planted here. It's a decent sized garden. Looks like I've had a deer through here in the last few days, but look at just how wet it is. And this is usually quite dry. It's probably the 2nd lowest garden that I have. Last year I didn't grow corn just because it wasn't warm enough. And I think that that's kind of has what happened this year as well. We'll see. I'll let the corn grow to what they are, and if I get some, I'll be lucky and happy, but I'm not counting on getting any corn from this garden anyways. This is kind of our onion garden, I guess you could say. I've got some onions growing really well. Now these are started onion seeds that I just pick up, well, at a PV Mart or Walmart or anywhere like that. These are really great because they last all winter. Like I was just finishing using my onions from last garden season. I had my last onion I used in May, so they do last quite a long time. I just plant, red onions, cooking onions, Spanish onions, and then this year I tried shallots, which I have never grown shallots before, but I'm totally looking forward to having some shallots because I love adding them to sauces and dressings. So really looking forward to that. These are pretty much almost done. They're going to seed now, but looking forward to a good onion harvest. I think I'm definitely have onions for the winter this year. There's lots to be had here. Oh boy, something's been eating my peppers. So these were planted out about the same time as my tomato plants, but something is eating them. Hopefully, I don't know so much about these 2 plants, but I'm hoping that these other ones, there haven't been too bad. I just planted some leftover tomato plants actually that I didn't have room for in my other section. I think these are more like cherry tomatoes, so I just kind of stuck them here. And then this is one of my zucchini plants that I started indoors, I want to say in April. So it's produced a lot of flowers, but no fruits yet. So I guess like my take home from how bad the garden is doing this year is that I'm going to focus more on starting a lot of things indoors. Typically, like I'm not going to do my beans. Beans are pretty quick at coming up anyways, but I think like next year going forward, preparing for these bad years, I am going to spend more time and more effort starting some things more in the house so that they have a good head start. Every year is a bit different. Usually I don't have any problems growing zucchini or anything, but I want to say like we're probably going to have like 4 or 5 zucchini crop compared to I usually have 12 planted. Might seem a bit excessive because you get a lot of zucchinis, but we put a lot of zucchinis away for zucchini soup in the winter. It's one of my daughter's favorites, that and squash. Yeah, I think that's my biggest take home. Definitely starting a lot more indoors, and maybe not planting everything, but planting some of things. So like, you know, if I plant like 12 zucchinis, usually maybe I'll just have 6 planted just for, you know, that crop, just in case things don't work out. But another thing is, I think that I really need to invest in some more compost or manure in the main garden. It's been probably at least 3 years since I have added amendments or compost or manure to the garden. So I think that going forward next year, I think I need to do that, as well as really maybe I'm going to need to try and improve the soil or something in the asparagus, because I've noticed from watching previous years' videos, the asparagus is doing like phenomenal. In the past 2 years, it's dwindling down. So I really need to improve that. And my raspberries. I noticed in last year's videos that I said like the raspberries weren't doing super well. We did get a harvest from the raspberries last year. This year they're doing even worse. I think maybe investing in some sort of mulch might really help increase my yields and cut down on some of the weeds that are coming through. So I'm going to take you over now and I'll show you some of like the berry some of the berry gardens that I have. While I'm here, I'm going to show you the apple trees. So this is the very first apple tree that we ever planted. Lots of apples coming along. Looking good. We actually planted this one, I want to say, it could have been around the same time. I think it was 1 or 2 years after we planted this one here. I'm not too sure, like it could be a Wolf River. I'm not sure what that one is. It's so long ago. I know there is a Wolf River somewhere in this location, so I think that might be one of them. This here is blueberries. We've got 6 blueberry plants on the homestead. I'd like to increase them more. They seem to be doing okay in this location. These are the raspberries. I really think the weeds have taken over. This is really sad. So at one point, I've got like 3 rows. We planted about 250 raspberry canes. And we used to get about 48 jars of jam just out of this small section here. And now I'm really not getting the same amount like yield as we were. The rain has taken a lot of the raspberries, like they just turned to mush. Like the forest is really coming in this way and really cutting into, and I think weeding out my raspberries. You know, there's still some really nice canes coming up. These ones here, I would say by next week, I mean, we've got a lot that are still coming, but there's just not the same amount of a yield as normal. And so these are the Nova Red. So I've got Nova Red in these 2 here, and then I think I've got Eden at the back. And then I've got Anne, which is like the yellow raspberry. I can actually show you, there's a couple yellow ones coming. This one's not a bad looking one. So this is a Nova Red raspberry. It's very sweet. I find that the yield, like really good yields off of these raspberry canes. I do recommend growing these. They're relatively easy to find anywhere, and they are inexpensive compared to some varieties, but I really have been happy with the Nova Red. They're really tasty. A little tart, but they're very nice. I don't see any of the Eden. The Eden are more expensive. They're red, but they're much larger. They're a huge red raspberry. So this is new growth, which will be fruiting next year. So that's promising to see that there's definitely, again, some new growth here for next season. I know locally, we usually go strawberry picking locally, and they didn't have their strawberry season even open at all this year to go picking. So definitely locally, the gardens just aren't, you know, producing that well, especially with the rain and the lack of heat. It does affect your crop. I'll show you now some really nice of these Anne raspberries. So there's Anne. Man, you can see how big they are compared to my finger. They get quite big. Well, they are a bit soft. Look at that. Like so they're almost like they're much sweeter than a red raspberry. These are also more expensive to buy, and they usually bear twice. I will say that the wasps tend to target these a lot more than even the reds, so it's really hard to sometimes get a decent crop because you have to compete with the wasps. But they're probably one of my favorite raspberries, taste wise anyway. They don't really have that tart flavor. Here's another Nova Red. Still a little bit hard yet. And like this whole row here is all of the Ann. You can see we've got some more Ann growing. And then all this section back here, I don't know if you can see it on the camera or not, but there's more Ann growing there. There's a couple more over here. The rain has like pushed everything down. So maybe it's just even harder to see because all the plants, like they've gotten so tall that they've just fallen. I had like put some wire to hold them up a couple years ago. And I think that maybe we need to redo that as well. Just kind of keep things from falling at a place. When you do have big gardens though that are spread around, it is really hard to maintain them all. Just making sure that the weeds don't take over, and really it's like you got to spend a week of weed eating and mowing the lawns and weeding, and then it's like, okay, now you got to go back and spend some time with the gardens, and then you got to somehow time manage your chickens as well. Finding like it's like you got to pick one thing to focus on every now and then, and it's kind of how it is on a homestead. As you can see here, we've got our asparagus. They're kind of letting them go to seed now. It wasn't a great season. You can see here's one here. Looks good, but I really want them to grow well next year. So all these are going to seed, and amongst these poor weeds. And then we've got a beautiful haskaps. So we've got 2 rows of haskaps, and then we have like a garden of currants back here. We did get a good harvest of haskaps this year that I might be making into jam. Someone had suggested that. Normally I would just freeze them, whatever I don't use, and use them for smoothies. I really like the haskaps. They grow a lot faster than our blueberry plants, and we get a decent harvest off of these. So they definitely are a faster fruiting bush to grow over the blueberries. It doesn't take the place of a blueberry because I like the taste of the blueberries a little bit better than the haskaps. But I'm thinking with the harvest that I did get from the haskaps this year, I'll probably make into jam. And then just over here is our currants. The birds have gotten to the currants. Got tons and tons of red currants. So many red currants here. Like, look at them all. So I love red currant jam. Probably one of my favorites. I mean, who doesn't love jam anyways, but there is a lot of red currants here, so I'm really happy about that. Now these are probably my favorite tasting currants to eat fresh. Is the champagne pink currants. Yeah, so definitely one of my favorites. It's really nice. We've got lots coming on too. And then we have the black currants. Probably your highest yielding currant. I say that looking at all these red and pink and everything, but the black grow faster and yield higher, but they taste awful. Now, some people like them, I don't, but you can actually replace black currants with elderberries. So black elderberry syrup for like coughs, colds, and infections. You can actually replace the elderberries if you don't have them with the black currants, and that's kind of why we planted them, is because they have the similar properties of the elderberry. I know this is a garden tour video, but I have to mention the chickens. So these are the chickens that we started in our new incubator in the spring. I think we've got 5 or 6 hens and 5 roosters from that hatch. And the reason why I'm bringing up the chickens, because there are some years that the chickens don't lay well, and then there's some years that the garden does really well. So interesting thing is, this year the garden, in my opinion, it kind of sucks, but I still will get food from the garden. I know that. But this year the chickens are laying so many eggs compared to other years. One of those things, again, where I mentioned earlier, take the good that you have going on the homestead and focus on the good. So I'm just going to say, like, we have an abundance of eggs this year compared to some of other years. You know, maybe next year won't be as good with the eggs, but there's usually something. So if you've got a few things going on the homestead, maybe you're just into gardening, maybe you're just into chickens, maybe you're just into cattle or whatever else. If you have multiple things going on, not too much because you don't want to overdo yourself, but if you have multiple things going on, guaranteed at least one or two of them is going to do good. You won't feel like your whole homestead have failed. That's a good thing. So if you have multiple things going on the homestead, there are going to be things that are going to do really well, and that can keep you motivated to keep going and keep from getting too discouraged. Anyways, I'm just going to show you now. This is one of my lettuce beds. I need to weed this one. It's probably the one that I spend the least amount of time in. It's in the shade, so things grow well here. And then my other lettuce bed, I'm letting everything from there go to seed, so I have new seed for next year. So this is my main lettuce bed for eating. I need to go through and I need to weed. And I'm so thankful, I did plant some chard, a couple chard in this bed as well. So I got to go through, I've got a weed in here, but I've got the devil's ear lettuce. I got the Rouge d'Ivoire lettuce, Paris Island Cos lettuce, and I even planted some dinosaur kale, which is probably one of my favorite kales. So I've got a few of that growing, and I did start some radish seeds in here. So I'm going to be weeding out these little, at least these weeds, they're not hard to get rid of. And hopefully I'll eventually find, oh, here's my little radish coming up here. The last few years I've actually sown carrots in here, and I sown carrots, I'll show you, right here. This is one of the carrots. I'll pluck that out because I don't need it. Anyways, I actually sowed carrots in this bed last year and the year before. Yeah, you can see it there. Specifically for seed for following year. Oh, we've got another volunteer carrot. Because I don't need any more carrot seeds. I've got lots, so I'm just going to pluck those out. Anyways, so I do designate certain raised beds for saving seed specifically. And so, anyways, this was a saving seed bed for the last 2 years. So this year, I'm like, okay, I want to just have it for harvesting some lettuce and stuff for fresh greens. So that's kind of what this bed has been designated to. And the fact that it's kind of shaded here is a good location for it, especially for the greens. I think next year I was over visiting Jenny from Denbigh Ranch, and she had like an abundance of lettuce. It was growing so well, and she actually put cover on it. So I think next year I'm going to invest in putting some cover over my lettuce, especially early on in the season, just to get the heat as well as the protection from some of the like slugs and bugs and whatever else is going on. So there's definitely some things that I can do to improve my chances of having like a more successful garden next year. I'll just take you to two last things, and that will be it of our July garden tour. Mid-July, loaded with hazelberts. So these will be harvestable in the fall, but they seem to be thriving very well, and I think we'll have a really good harvest again. Each year the harvest tends to just increase with these bushes. Very green, very good. Lots to be harvested. I did forget to mention the comfrey. This is the second growth of the comfrey. It grows multiple times, and you can harvest multiple times, and this is really good for like fertilizer for around your bushes, your fruit trees, as well as natural remedy. It's really good for healing, so you can make salves and creams out of. I actually have 2 of these bushes, and they just keep producing. They're really great to have, really great pollinators. As you can see, the bees just love the comfrey. And as we showed you last week, our sour cherry bushes, Oh, look at that. We still got one growing here. Birds haven't got that one yet. I think I will steal that one. These are usually being picked the first week of July. So they're pretty well all done. Got a couple, got one still coming on here. This one tends to be a little bit later in the season, but not quite ripe, I don't think. Yeah, that one's still hard. Got another little one there. So this is the sour cherry bushes. We've got a few of them, and then we have our gooseberries. That's one of my gooseberries, and another gooseberry plant here. Well, that about ends our mid-July garden tour. I really hope your garden's doing better than mine, but I am excited to see how the tomatoes and the beans are doing, especially even these grapes. I think we're going to get lots of grapes this year. I am going to bring you back in August. We'll do another garden tour, and we're just going to see how much things can grow in such a short amount of time, especially hopefully it's the last of too much rain and we start getting some of the nice sunshine and nice heat that our garden does need to produce good crop.